a song. He's had a couple of requests tonight for it. It's called The Unclouded Day.
It's in the book. It's in the book. Jack, pick it up.
Far beyond the skies, and they tell me I'm home far away. Oh, they tell me I'm home when those storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me I'm not a cloudy day. Oh, the land of cloudless days. Oh, the land of an unclouded sky. They tell me I'm home when those storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me I'm not unclouded day. And they tell me I'm a king and there's beauty in there. And they tell me that mine eyes shall behold. This king whose robe is whiter than snow, in a city that is made of gold. Oh, the land of cloudless days. Oh, the land of unclouded sky. Oh, they tell me I'm home where those storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me I'm an unclouded day. And they tell me that he smiles on his children there, and his smile drives their sorrows away. And they say no sorrow shall come to them in this lovely land of unclouded days. Oh, the land of cloudless days. Oh, the land of an unclouded sky. Oh, they tell me I'm home where those storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me I'm an unclouded day. Yes, they tell me I'm an unclouded day.
1,003, huh? I thought I was tireder than usual after Sunday night. How many people listening to you? Where you at? You know? No, just teasing. Well, that's great. Good to know that. That may be our biggest number we've ever had at one time here. Good evening to everybody. Well, it's good to see you all tonight. We are tonight in the book of Genesis on Thursday nights. On Sunday mornings we're in the book of John, and we're at the 13th chapter tonight. And so if you 18th chapter, and get there and catch up with us in just a little bit. Wouldn't it be great if every once in a while God would just show up in your life and sit down in the front room with you and where you could talk to Him? Wouldn't that be great to just have a face-to-face conversation where you would just get to asking questions and just know when He answered you, you know you were hearing correctly. God speaks to us all the time, and every day He meets with us and carries our burdens and communicates with us. But there's sometimes, I used to work with a fellow that was he was a preacher, and he was so funny and such a good heart. He'd say, I wish God would just stick His head out of heaven sometimes and say boo, you know. And that's the way I feel. Wouldn't it be good if God just show up on the scene? We just have a nice long talk to talk about everything. What would you ask him if he showed up? That's rhetorical. I don't want you to answer, but what would you ask him if he showed up at your house? Would you want to know your future? Think about that just a moment. Would you really want to know your future? I've thought about that a lot. I don't know if God showed up. I don't know if I'd even ask him about my future, because if he said I was going to die in a Dairy Queen, I would never want even to know the Dairy Queen. Or I might want to go quicker. I don't know. Depending on the mood you're in. But I don't know. What you want to know? I've had some experiences where I felt like God just was so real and so personal and so close that it just like we had these conversations, and there are times I could just almost reach out and touch him. You know how that is, and I long for those. I don't know why he doesn't give us those experiences all the time. I guess we couldn't live by faith if he was there every day that close, but it would be great to get to talk with him. What would you want him to do for somebody else? What would you want him to do for somebody you know or love? Well, that's something I'm thinking of that would be a tremendous blessing. Whenever you get a chance to be an intercessor, I'm going to talk about intercessory prayer just a little bit tonight, but intercessory prayer is the most powerful of all prayers. When you're praying selflessly for somebody else, I think that's a prayer that truly gets heaven's attention. Now, tonight in the background of our study of chapter 18, we're going to find Abraham and Sarah. They're settling in to the life in Canaan. They're living by the tree of Mamre, the nurse tree there, this beautiful area, this comfortable area. Their needs are being met. There's water, there's food, there's grazing ground for their animals. This is a great time. They're in the middle of they're late in their life. They're in their 80s and 90s. And they're comfortable. They're waiting for God to keep His promises. They've been waiting a long time. God made them a promise, but God has not kept that promise yet. And they're living by faith. They keep hanging on. You know, God's going to do this. But they're beginning to sort of lose a little bit of the edge of the hope. I'm not saying they've lost hope. I don't believe they've lost faith. But I think they're beginning to kind of, not overtly doubt it, but I think down subconsciously they're, if they'd be honest, they'd say they're beginning to wonder how this is going to work out. I don't know about you, but sometimes God makes a promise to us, and He's going to do this and so, and then the years go by, and a long time passes, and nothing happens. And I've got several prayers I've been praying for 20, 30, 40 years for people, and so far, for a few, I've still not seen the promise come through, but I'm still holding on to the promises. I remember there was experience when God was dealing with my wife and I about starting a new congregation, and we'd been praying about it all summer long, and God just sort of told me, revealed to me, that I'm going to let you know on the last day of August, or by the last day of August, what you're supposed to do. I'll never forget how long that August was, and it was the very last day of August, and nothing had happened. I hadn't heard from God. The details that hadn't fallen in place, and then on the last day of August, about 5 or 6 questions that we needed answered just fell in my lap in one afternoon. And see, God kept His promises, and but sometimes we sort of want to doubt that. They were confused. You know, God said this, but this has happened, and God's promised this, and this hadn't happened. And so I'm sure they were a little confused. Now, there are times when God is going to seem very far away from you. Have you ever experienced those times? And I don't understand it. I don't really know why, but there are times when God chooses purposefully to distance Himself from us. And I know it's out of love. I know it's out of a heart of love for us. But there are times when He just seems to not be where we can reach out and touch Him and get answers that we need. But listen, even though there are times He seems far away, we are never out from under His love and care. And if you're here this evening and you are experiencing one of those lean times, one of those dry times, that God is just not answering the prayers like you think He should, or you can't communicate with Him like you want to, I want you to know, just because you are struggling in communication, that doesn't mean that you're away from Him or that God doesn't love you. So how should I live in the presence of God? How can I live in the presence of God? What do I do? How do I make this presence of God real enough in my life? How do I live in the presence? And so I've asked that question, but I want to come now to the 18th chapter of Genesis for the answers, because I think found in this chapter are some of those answers we've all been wondering and looking for. Lord, how do I live in your presence? How's this going to work? And so we're going to watch tonight how that Abraham and Sarah are visited by God and by two other spiritual creatures, two other spirit beings. They come to Abraham and they spend an afternoon with him and they talk. They sit around the house, they have a meal together, they share intimate details of what's going on. God shares his heart with Abraham about what he's going to do in the future. And so we're going to look at that tonight in the story and see if you and I can glean from this story how to live in the presence of God. First of all, I want to say, before I begin this, the outline is like this. I believe we should live with an attitude of reverence and submission. That's how we live, with an attitude of reverence and submission. The old Greek philosophers would talk about, the Jewish people went to the temple to worship, but the Greeks would say things like that the whole world is a temple, and everywhere I go, I feel God's presence. In other words, they lived in God's presence. They didn't go to a building to worship God's presence, be in God's presence. They walked with his presence all the time. And I think that's what I want to say tonight. We need to develop and grow an attitude of reverence and submission. Let's read chapter 18. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre, while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. Now here we have a beautiful picture of the ancient world hospitality. They took care of strangers, and I've talked about this a lot. But here Abraham saw this man, these 3 men actually, out there, and he ran to them, fell down and fell down before them and bowed low to the ground. Now when the Lord and these 2 other men, and I think they were probably angels, but the Lord they showed up at Abraham's camp about lunchtime. They showed up and Abraham greeted them with reverence and submission. And he was treated them nice. See, I think what we need to be careful of is that we live in such an irreverent world. We live in a world where, the things that go on around us and the things in life, the music we listen to, the stories we read or hear about on TV, there is a lack of reverence in our world today for God. We seem to just hear his name taken in vain, and nobody seems to care, and the language, we're not living reverently. And I believe that living with a heart that's always being stirred with irreverence, I think it's hard to be in God's presence. And I think we should concentrate and still our hearts and still our souls so that we can be reverent and hear the Lord and live with him. Life should be lived every day in his presence with reverence. Now, without stress and being aware of the bounty of God's gifts. We live in such as I said, our world is so stressful, but we need to come away. We need to come away and find a way to still our hearts so we can listen to the Lord and live with an attitude of reverence and submission. Then the next thing I want to notice here in verse 3, I believe we should live with a heart of worship. Now before I read this, let me tell you how to get more out of a corporate worship experience. How do you enjoy a corporate worship experience more and more and more as you live your life? I want to tell you how to do that. Don't come to a corporate worship experience without having been worshiping privately at home. See, if you don't ever worship the Lord privately, and you walk in here, it's such a radical change. But just imagine you've come from a week where you've been worshiping the Lord in your prayer time, in your mind and in your heart, and then you've been doing that by yourself, in the car, at the job, whatever. But then you walk in with other brothers and sisters in the Lord, and you all join together. Listen, that's the best kind of worship that you can have. But see, if you just come to church, just pop in, without ever having been in a worshipful mood all week long, it's kind of foreign country to you. You sit around there, what's wrong with them people? Why are they getting so happy? Why are they excited about singing these songs and being together? I don't get it. What's their problem? Well, they don't have a problem. You got the problem. Amen? All right. Let's read about this. Verse 3. He said, if I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat so that you can be refreshed and then go on your way, now that you have come to your servant. Very well, they answered. Do as you say. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. Quick, he said. I could just hear this, could you? Men, have you ever done this? Quick, hurry up, quick. He said, get 3 seahs of finest flour and knead it and make it some bread. I don't think he needed to tell her how to do all that. He could have just said, cook them some bread. I bet she knew how. But anyway, verse 7. Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk. Curds, cottage cheese? We all on the same page? Okay, some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared, and set these before them. And while they ate, he stood near them under a tree. Now, what I see here is Abraham couldn't do enough for these people. You see, that's what, when we worship, we find ourselves enjoying God's presence, and we want to bless Him. In other words, if we could, we'd make God a loaf of bread. If we could, we'd kill Him a calf. You know, we would do whatever we could to be in His presence. And so we find in Abraham there that he had this heart of worship. You see, worship causes our heart to desire to serve. When we worship God, we truly see Him for who He is, and we see us for who we are. I mean, we create a heart that wants to bless Him, and not just serve Him, but serve others. And that's what we find Him doing here. And so worship creates that heart of worship. Worship also creates a heart of giving. Whenever we've come to the Lord and we've worshiped Him all week long, we come into a worship setting and the peace is flowing and the joy is there, and it opens up in our heart a sense of giving. We want to give. It just clears out the cobwebs, and we want to be there, be more of a giver. So the way we do this, as I said, to live each moment of your day with a heart of worship. Just get up in the morning, and the first thing you do, begin to worship the Lord. Just begin. You don't have to close your eyes and do all fancy stuff. You just worship in your heart. Just have a heart that's tuned to Him. Begin to listen to Him and just thank Him. Thank Him. Have you ever just stopped praying for things and just started thanking Him? So often when we come to the Lord, we just beat Him up with our shopping list. You know, God, I want you to do this, and I want you to do this. And we get tired of. Don't you get tired of bossing God around sometimes? Quit bossing Him around. Just get up and say, Lord, thank you for a beautiful sunset. Thank you for a morning breakfast. Thank you for a good night's sleep. Just be thankful for what you've got, and it creates a heart of worship. All right. Then I want you to, if you're going to walk in God's presence and live and be with Him, you need to live with joy and expectation. You see, did you know that most of the time in life we get what we expect? When you come to church and you expect to be blessed, you're probably going to get blessed. But if you come to church and you expect to be bored to death and sleep through it, and can't hardly wait till you get home, wonder what's on TV, oh, we miss it right now. Well, guess what? You're going to get exactly what you expect. So create in your heart an anticipation of walking with God, an anticipation of joy of being in His presence. Let's read about Abraham's expectation of joy. Verse 9. Where is your wife, Sarah? They asked him. There in the tent, he said. Then one of them said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Now, wait a minute. I mean, this promise has been going on now for decades. And now these guys, this angel, says to his wife, Sarah, you're going to have a son. You're going to have him. Oh my goodness. What you talk about expectation and joy. And this has set a new level of it for them. By now, I imagine they started beginning to kind of worry about maybe this wasn't going to happen. I remember when I was in my 50s, last couple of year or two ago. And I had a joyful life. of church service and church ministry, and enjoyed my life so much of getting to serve the Lord in that capacity. And I dawned on me, I may not have too many great adventures ahead of me in ministry, because I'm a church starter. I love to start churches. I love to grow churches and be a part of things that God is doing. And I've got to do that so many wonderful times, so many times in my life. I've enjoyed it so much. I thought, you know what? I may not have too many of them ahead of me. And I began to think, well, I'm in a dead end deal here, and I'm going to be stuck here forever. And then the Lord said, no, what about a cowboy church? You understand? Oh, there's a lot of excitement ahead for you. So don't give up, folks. You may be 195 years old, but God's got stuff for you yet. Don't get tired. Don't give up. Live with expectation. The greatest adventures in your faith are just ahead of you. Listen to it. I'm telling you the truth. Your greatest adventures of faith are just around the corner. They're not past. They're in your future. You're going to have to learn to live more by faith. And God's there. So just hang on. They're going to be there out in front of you. Look forward to the days ahead as you live in the presence of God. And folks, look forward to the days ahead when you actually go into His presence. If you're at the end of your life, there's more wonderful things ahead of you. Look forward to that with joy and expectation. I love this part here where Sarah laughed about this. Let's read about it. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself. You get that now? So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I'm worn out and my Lord is old, now will I have this pleasure? Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, now folks, just a moment. Did you hear? Sarah laughed to herself. She didn't laugh out loud. She laughed to herself. But this was the Lord, the King of Kings. He heard that, and then he asked the question, why'd she laugh? Will I really have a child now that I'm old? Verse 14. Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, I did not laugh. But he said, oh, yes, you did laugh. Oh, my. The Lord knew the heart of Sarah. He knew her heart. The Lord knows your heart, too. Put your name there, too. He knows your heart. He knows if you've given up on Him, if your faith is failing, or if you're still growing. The Lord knows where you are. And I want you to say tonight, I want to say to you, live with a faith that's willing to grow. Live with a faith that's willing to be stretched. Now, amen? But it's okay to go ahead and ask Him anyway. To partner with Him. And to encourage. If you need something in your life, you say, just bring it to the Lord. And He will move into that partnership with you. And then, of course, the intercessor, we talked about that earlier, how that Abraham interceded with the people there. Lord, well, let's get this number lower and lower and lower. But nothing happened. But I want to, simply before I end the sermon, I want to say this. A prayer of intercession, again, is powerful. I encourage you to find somebody in your life that is in need, that's hurting, maybe that's lonely, that's abandoned, maybe that's financially destitute. Find somebody in your life that needs love and needs somebody to care, and you begin to silently, behind the scenes, start praying for that person. Just lift them up. You all have somebody like that. Many of you already are praying these sorts of prayers. And begin to lift that person up to the Lord. And say, God, take their case to the Lord and intercede for them. And you're going to notice a great power will move into your life and also into their lives as people begin to lift them up. I wish I could tell you on a weekly basis how many people, how many emails I get, or people will talk to me or whatever, and they say, Pastor, we're praying for you. And I can't tell you how that blesses me. To know that the congregation is taking me to the Lord. Denny, almost every time Denny Gold prays a prayer, he'll always pray for me. And I take that very strongly. That doesn't just fly over my head. I know people are praying for me, interceding. And that's so important for my life and for my ministry to you. But we can do that for others too. Let's find somebody that needs that prayer and lift them up. So what do you need to know? The Lord is near. He may seem like He's a long way off, but He's near. And He wants to share life with you. He does. He wants to be there with you. So open your eyes and heart to His presence. Don't miss another opportunity. Don't miss another day to live without His presence. He's there. He wants to share life with you. If you're here this evening and you've got to this point in your life and you've never invited Him in as a personal friend, listen, He's ready. He's willing. And He wants to come in and change your life. He won't force His way into your life. He didn't force His way into Abraham's tent. He stood afar off. Abraham went and invited him in. And when he invited him, he came in. I'm going to say it like this and I'm done. Never in the history of the universe has anyone ever invited God into their life and He said no. He always says yes. Always says yes. So if you're ready tonight for God to come into your life, just ask Him and He'll say yes. If with all your heart you truly seek me, you will surely find me. Thus saith the Lord. Let's pray together.